We'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our session, Global Disruptors, the Act of Kindness, as part of our 2025 International Education Week webinar series, organized by AFS Intercultural Programs. Just as a reminder, this is a webinar. Your camera and microphone are closed, but you can still interact. So we have the Q&A enabled. We would encourage you to send us your questions. You can use the reactions to interact and engage. We also have closed captions available. AI note-taking is not allowed, and we have tried to disable it. So we'll see. This session is being recorded, so we can share it with all of the registrants, whether they were able to join us today or not. Again, this webinar series is hosted by AFS. AFS, as you may know, is a global nonprofit organization focused on developing active global citizens who contribute to a more peaceful, just, equitable, and sustainable world. We do that through international education programs, volunteerism, education resources, advocacy initiatives, such as these webinars in celebration of International Education Week. I am really excited to kick off this week, our first session, with my colleague, Catherine Ingvi, with whom I've had the privilege of partnering on many projects. So I am Linda, the host. I am the Director of Global Education Innovation at AFS International, head of our Global Competence Certificate Program, which is currently celebrating 10 years with over 20,000 certificate holders over the past decade. And I hope and suspect that there will be a moment as we're chatting about kindness and we learn of its broad definition and scope where this integral role, this concept of kindness plays an integral role in global competency. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for your graciousness, I won't say kindness, your graciousness in agreeing to have us do this session on kindness as a disruptive force, which is kind of an evolving concept, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we get to our brief set of slides and then into our conversations. I am so grateful, I think we can go to the next slide, to have 5 friends who've agreed to join us today to talk about kindness, who work in various corners of the world and in various ways demonstrate kindness in their personal being as well as in their professional lives. So you see a brief slide there of the names. Nadine is joining us from Istanbul today, although she's usually based in Cairo. Mark is joining us from Washington, D.C. in the U.S. Andy is in a little village south of London in the U.K. Sarah is joining us from Paris. I think I was able to see Paris behind you in your background there. And Sean will be joining us in recorded mode from Denver, Colorado. So I think we are ready for the first. So what is kindness? The thing I like about kindness as a concept for international education is it draws from both the Western and the non-Western traditions. So Aristotle wrote about kindness as helpfulness, as a virtue, and it's necessary for true friendship, whereas Confucius talked about it as the foundation of all moral behavior, benevolence, the highest of values that encompasses love, respect, trustworthiness, and empathy. And it's trying to enlarge oneself, which I think is very characteristic of international education. Next slide, please. For me, it kind of started actually in 2023 when I started following a scholar who works at a small liberal arts college in Illinois, one state over from me, Dr. Catherine Denial. She goes mostly by Kate, and she does consult on this if anybody wants to look up her website. I neglected, I'm sorry, to put her consulting website on the slide. She began writing about kindness as her pedagogical theory of operation, and she subsequently published this book in 2024. Kindness is not about being nice. That's the first thing I want everyone to understand. It's not just going along to get along, but it's taking a stand, committing to justice, believing in your coworkers and in your partners and in your students, valuing their perspectives, and fostering a supportive and inclusive learning environment where everyone can succeed. Next slide, please. Subsequently, and this was actually funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation in 2024, Dr. Denial went on with a bunch of researchers from 20 organizations to write about centering care in the academic research enterprise and to disrupt the harmful conditions of academic research competition, colonialism, inequities in resource allocation, and an obsession with education as something you do to prepare for a job. Yep, there we are. And you can also grab this title and look for this title. It's easily out there. When I saw this one, I thought, oh, I had resonated to Dr. Denial's pedagogy. Yes, that's how I teach. That's how I lead study abroad. But when I saw this one that she and others had put together, I said, oh, but you can scale that up. You can scale that up and build it into your business models if you so choose. And so I've asked all of our panelists here for you because in some way they have either experienced structures of kindness in the workplace or created structures of kindness in the workplace, if not both. So do I have another slide here, Linda? I forget. What's the next slide? Is international education kind? Well, I think international education is full of compassionate people, and particularly in the structures that we build for students, we are probably kind. AFS itself is absolutely rooted in compassion. You see the historical folder from their archives. They started as folks who were volunteering to operate ambulances during World War II and again in World War III. From the bonding that occurred through this service, they began to create youth exchange so that there wouldn't be any more war in the world, basically. And so they're not the only international education, but I do want to highlight them since they're kind enough to host this session as one of the earliest to be embodying kindness in their ethos. And then also UNESCO, since 1998 and then rededicating themselves in 2018, have looked at kindness as a way of explicitly making our world better and thinking about a more sustainable Earth since there is no planet B. So in these brief examples, yes, I think international education is kind, but I don't think we as a profession yet have really focused on intentional kindness, while we as the individuals that you see in front of us have, and I'd like us all, their examples, to be inspiration for you. So what we're going to do next, I think, if we got one more slide, or are we shutting it down to begin the conversation? We are shutting it down to begin the conversation. Thank you, folks. Okay, so I'm going to start with Andy. We're going to kind of go in alphabetical order by first name. And I would like, if you would be so kind, Andy, do you want me to praise you or you want to introduce yourself first?
I'm always open to praise, but I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Andy Pring, as Catherine said, in the UK. I am here on the back of the business that I founded just over a year ago called Creative Writing for Social Change. And so, yeah, that's me, and then we'll talk more about that as we go on.
Great. I think Andy first came to my attention through LinkedIn. We do have some areas of overlap where we worked, not at the same time, but for some of the same people on virtual exchange. Uh, when he was seeking to put together a speed networking group for people who do anti-immigrant work, or people who do anti-immigrant work. I always get that wrong. People who are combating anti-immigrant narratives in their country. And while I don't want to discount the kindness and the agency building of creative writing for social change, I'll circle back to that. Can you just tell us a little bit about your speed networking and how you decided to do that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, first of all, please do come along, everybody. It's on the last Thursday of every month, and so we have one next week, I think. But I think you're going to kindly send the details out in the email to follow. It came to me that specific initiative. It was probably about this time last year, actually, and it was as many people know, but if you don't, that in the UK, as elsewhere in particularly Western Europe and the US, there is a rise of right-wing populism, and in the UK, that is embodied in a man called Nigel Farage, who was kind of behind pushing for Brexit many years ago, and then set up his current political party called Reform UK, which is doing frighteningly well in the polls, and it's gone from a very, very fringe movement to now frighteningly possible that it might become the next government in a few years' time. And so this time last year, Nigel Farage was in Mar-a-Lago with Donald Trump, and there was a picture of him and Trump and Elon Musk all looking very, very smug together, and it just terrified me in seeing what this man was able to achieve with fairly limited resources, and then seeing what he might, or imagining what he might be capable of doing with funding from someone like Elon Musk. And so I kind of felt that I just felt that I needed to have some kind of practical reaction to that. And I'm fortunate enough to know many people in this country and elsewhere who are trying their hardest to break down this idea that immigration is a bad thing, and more importantly at the moment, that this to disrupt this narrative that migrants are to blame for all the ills facing our society and our economy, which unfortunately is getting a lot of traction, that narrative. So as I was aware that there were so many people doing this work, but I was aware that so many people feel isolated when they are doing this work, and they kind of feel like it's them against the world. And yeah, if we come together, we can feel so much more positive and so much more emboldened, and actually much more efficient and effective. So I just kind of put it out there on LinkedIn. Let's just once a month, everybody, open invitation, free of charge, come together. Let's just do speed networking. So people break into small rooms of about 3 people. We have a little bit of time in the middle for any professional updates or any particular voice that I feel is helpful to be heard. And that's effectively it. And then it's just creating a space for cross-pollination, mutual solidarity and encouragement, and it very organically, collaborations come out of that.
It's so amazing. I think it's really important to think about kindness as being kind to one another in our emotional space, right? And remembering that people are scared, and when we talk to one another, we can get creative, or we can just feel better, and then we're able to do our work better and push back against those governmental cruelties that many of us are experiencing. What I'm going to just briefly ask, we have a reflection question. We're going to get to the audience, but if you think about your own upbringing, where did that kindness, that impulse to reach out come from, Andy?
Mhm. Yeah, I was thinking about this question earlier, and I think very quickly I realised that the biggest influence on me was my mum. I grew up in an evangelical family, though I'm not a practicing Christian anymore. But I can trace the roots of what I do now to my mum and her Christian faith, and that
Mm,
the influence that had on
mm,
me. And
mhm,
my mum was always a person to kind of reach out to the outcasts, even though we grew up. I grew up in a very white middle class society community. There are even in those kinds of societies, you have outcasts. And my mum, I don't know quite what it says about my mum, but she has a homing instinct for the people who are cast out the most. And so I grew up, seeing my mum befriend the people who no one else wanted to befriend.
mm.
And she
It's
did that with,
beautiful.
yeah, she did that with adults, but she did it with youth. No one else at the church, no one else wanted to take over the youth work. And my mum's not a natural youth worker, but she kind of took it on, and she ended up. I know that she was a lifeline to a lot of teenagers. And again, most people who've been stigmatized, people who were suffering from homophobia, particularly even within the Christian environment. She just always done that, and she's continued that. It was her birthday yesterday. She was 75
I want
yesterday.
to talk more about writing for social change, and some of the amazing work you're doing to bring forth voices from, uh, particularly from Gaza. But
Hmm.
I want to move on so that all of our panelists have a chance to talk about. So I think next alphabetically is going to be Mark, and Mark, if you would introduce yourself and then throw it back at me, I'll tell them why I asked you to be a part of this panel.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you, Catherine and AFS for suggesting this, inviting me to participate. What a great idea. I love thinking about kindness. I think as Andy alluded to, we're living in, I think, unkind times. And so just to take some time and think about kindness and bring it to the forefront, I think is a great exercise in itself. So, yes, my name is Mark Lenhart. I'm executive director at CET Academic Programs. We are a study abroad provider. We're based in DC, in Washington, DC. And I'm unusual in that I've worked for CET for 35 years. I've never worked anyplace else. I started as a resident director and I've stayed with CET ever since. And it's given me a unique perspective, I think. Most people move all the time, and I'm not one of them. So,
Really neat. I've known Mark for a long time, and we sat down together at the conference where I was going to be presenting with Linda on kindness and started talking a little bit about it. And I was not surprised and yet surprised to hear that he had managed to build some structural kindness into his business. I don't know, you'll tell us whether that was something you came up with on your own or whether somebody helped you ideate. But we were talking about, well, I think we talked at the time about salary transparency within the organization. So for those of you who are not from the US, at least in the US, it's very unlikely that you're going to know what the salary offer is when you decide to apply for a job. And there are folks in the US, as well as Sarah Dart, who calls herself the Job Fairy, and who publishes weekly a list of international education jobs, which highlighting the ones that have salary transparency, are trying to make this more common in international education work. Why is this kind? It's kind because it helps reduce the anxiety and it helps you know whether it's worth the time you're going to invest in applying for this job. So Mark's going to tell us a little bit about that, and then something else that he remembered as he was reflecting to prepare for this session. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. So, I mentioned that I've been with CET a long time. I started out as a resident director in China. I studied abroad in China. And in those days, I think the model for CET and for a lot of people working in the space was hire a young person, get them abroad, and make them work as hard as possible for a couple years, and then replace them, right? They knowing that they will go to grad school or they will move on to some other job. And somewhere along the line, in the time that I've been at CET, I realized that this model is not sustainable and it's not something that is kind, right? And I became very interested in not only making sure our programs are the best that they can be, but also that our staff have jobs that are sustainable, that they can do for a long period of time, and that they enjoy, right? So I wanted to create a space where we made great jobs as well as great programs. And the interesting
Nice.
thing is, the thing that's happened, which was sort of unexpected, although I should have expected it, um, what I've learned is that when people feel empowered and supported and trusted, they do their best work. And so the programs benefit. So if you want to improve the programs that you're working on, focus on your employees and the rest will take care of itself. That's the lesson that I've learned. Um, yes, so we probably 5 or 6 years ago made a commitment to salary transparency in our when we recruit people. And it's been a very good um, exercise for us. There have been lots of unintended benefits, one of which is it's really kept us honest in terms of our existing staff. When we post a new job with a salary range, we have to be mindful of everyone who's worked for the company for a long time, right? Is that in line with what their pay is, right? So it's had this unintended effect of helping us make market corrections for staff for different teams depending on where they're working, how long they've been with us. And so it's been a very healthy effort. I'm really committed to it. I would recommend it to anybody. I know it's not possible in all contexts at all organizations, but when it is possible, I recommend doing it just because it increases trust with employees and it just makes for a more honest relationship with staff.
Well,
So
I'm
I
sure
think
your
that's
business benefits by getting higher quality applicants as well.
that's
And of
right.
course, you haven't mentioned, but it, the cost of any search to the institution or having
Exactly.
somebody leave is huge, right? If somebody leaves and you have to fill that position and it's open for 3 months, well, first of all, there's the cost on the rest of the staff, right? Because they have to take on that extra workload. And
Right.
there's also the cost of the advertising and the time of the interviewing and so forth. So it's really beneficial to your business to keep those employees happy.
Right. And so that's actually a great segue into this other thing that I mentioned earlier, which is our reduced hour work week. We, after the pandemic, when of course people were working from home and we were really maximizing flexibility and giving people a lot of autonomy to work from their bedrooms or whatever, um, we we decided with the help of what we called reimagining work teams, which were created by people on staff, um, to go from a 36.25-hour work week to a 30-hour work week. And we asked staff to complete their work in that 30 hours rather than 36.25, which means that for all of our staff worldwide, uh, they they had permission to be as efficient as efficient as possible to get their work done in 4 days instead of five and take a fifth day off. And so we started that in 2023. It's been great. It's been really interesting. Um, and it really speaks to this work-life balance priority
Yeah.
that we have. We did not cut pay, we did not cut benefits. That's usually a question people ask. So no reduction in compensation or benefits. But we did ask people to do it themselves, to figure out how to get their work done in a shorter period of time. And so people did audits of their meetings and decided, you know what, we don't need to meet as a team for an hour every week. We can do that online, or we can when we come together as a group, let's really make the most of that time together. Let's come prepared. Let's come with outcomes that we can take away. So it's made everyone much more efficient, and it's given us the benefit of giving a fifth day off, right? So most people are working 4 days and taking 3 days off. There have been some challenges. It's not all easy, but I would say we are more efficient, more productive, and we've done a better job with work-life balance for sure. So I would recommend to anyone that they consider implementing a reduced hour work week.
Thank you, Mark. You're actually leading into why I asked Sarah to join the panel. And so Nadine, I know I said I was going to go in alphabetical order, but if you don't mind, I want to throw it to Sarah for her. During the summer, Sarah was one of a faithful group. It will also include Sean Wall, who will speak to us in recorded mode in a little bit. We were thinking together and reflecting together about kindness and how we've experienced kindness in the workplace. And Sarah brought up some of the structures in France that she has experienced that think about supporting the worker. So Sarah, I think our audience, because some of our audiences in Europe already knows about this, but if you could just talk about structures that support work-life balance and how you have experienced them as an American working in France, that would be awesome.
Yeah, hello everyone. So just for context, I'm from New York, but I've been living in France for the past 6, 7 years. And I'm working as the International Programs Coordinator at a social work school called EPSS. That's part of a larger university, CY University. And so there have been a lot of things that when we talk about kindness, I feel like there's two parts of me, the American and now the one that knows the
Sure.
French culture, and the American's much more about the day-to-day individual acts, um, kind of philanthropic acts of kindness, spontaneous. Whereas for when I think about French acts of kindness, it's definitely much more structural, as you said. For example, there's a law that I discovered. It's called the right to disconnect, droit à la déconnexion in French, and it's a labor law, circa 2017, I think, and it gives employees the legal right to ignore like work-related emails, any electronic communication after work hours. And so its primary, the reason why it was created was to mitigate like burnout and also the boundaries between work and personal life. So that's really interesting because, you know, people are very in the know about it, cite it, etc. And so I think that's one of the obvious things like laws in the day to day, but I think there's also a different mindset, a different manner of going through life that's been really interesting as an American to experience.
Can you speak to that more? And I'm sorry to jump in, but full disclosure, I was a French major and I love France and I've been there. But the French are thought of as snobby. You know, they don't smile as readily as we Americans do.
Hmm.
And it would be easy to fall into the trap of thinking that they are unkind if you're a casual visitor.
Hmm.
So I'd like to hear more about how you've experienced it.
it's about the different cultural context, right? So it's not that they're necessarily unkind, but I think that it's more of a like a higher knit social framework, whereas the kindness is embedded in the framework. And in a
Mhm.
way, that means that in personal lives, it's not as accentuated in a weird way. Because
Hmm.
like in Americans, it's very accentuated because we're doing we're doing this, it's a very more individualistic society as well, right? And so when we talk about like Hofstede, etc. But in France, it's more of a context of we're not going to give to, not we're not going to give, but maybe we're not as enticed to give philanthropic actions because we believe it's the government's responsibility to take care of that with our higher taxes, right? So there's a different, I think that all affects the individuals like on a day-to-day level where I'm also from New York, so I'm very used to like hard demeanor, soft heart. And so I think I have in a weird way I found the kindest structural and the kindest people in France as well.
Thank you, Sarah. I wanna move to Nadine if we can, because she is part of an amazing effort. Um, and it's my fest. When I lost my job, which I did 2 years ago in an act of institutional unkindness that I won't go into deeply, um, it did give me more time to think about work-life balance and where I wanted to spend it. And I had heard about My Fest, which is a summer festival of engagement for educators around the world, of which Nadine is one of the coordinators. Nadine, can you tell us a little bit more about My Fest and how you got drawn into this co-creation of kindness, which lasts all summer?
Sure, thank you, Catherine. So, MyFest is part of a bigger sort of organization called Equity Unbound, and MyFest stands for Mid-Year Festival, essentially. So it's a summer 3 month, and by summer I don't mean to say it's summer for everybody. Sometimes June, July, and August are not summer for some people around the world. So it's June, July, and August of every year where we do professional development for educators around the world, primarily higher education educators, but lots of other educators also join us. And the core focus of Equity Unbound and MyFest is very much related to social justice and collaboration and open learning, and it's very equity focused. And we run 3 months of those sessions essentially. This was our last year actually. We're hoping to do more because yeah, we're hoping to get more funding to do more. And I've been part of
Okay.
Equity Unbound for a while now. I've actually been involved with the co-creators and kind of founders of Equity Unbound for a very long time when it was virtually connecting. And that was, an initiative to connect those who could not attend conferences physically on site to those who are online, um, to the speakers or keynote speakers of the conferences. And it was a way to get virtual folks to interact with these facilitators, really. So we would, have someone be on site, put up their computer in a corner somewhere, ask the facilitators or the keynote speakers kindly to sit with them and just talk to the people online who really want to just chat as we're chatting now and ask them some questions. So I've been involved with the virtually connecting that then got transitioned into Equity Unbound, and essentially at the core of a lot of what they were doing is
I,
kindness.
well, one of the amazing things, there are many amazing things about MyFest as I experienced them as somebody who had learned what a professional conference is in another country, in the USA, which is of course very task focused in general. What one thing about it is that it has a sliding pay scale. Andy's organization, Writing for Social Change, always has one. We'll come back to that, Andy. I promise. We'll make time for it. So if you can't afford to spend on your professional development, well, then you're spending your time, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. But even for a whole month of participation, it's very inexpensive. But also, and what struck me more is there are sessions which are really just focused on wellness and well-being and being in community together. And that's what you were in charge of this summer, if I'm not mistaken. Can you talk a little bit about some of the sessions that you organized?
Sure. So I'm actually the program manager, so I'm in charge of really organizing all
That
of
you
it.
led, let's
But
put
the
it that
ones,
way.
but a lot of the sessions that I lead are related to well-being and joy. And the reason I think my fest is different, and this is what you were saying, I think, Catherine, is because in the conference itself as a theme, you know, you would, you know, go in and propose a session, and you would choose the theme that it's related to. And obviously social justice and critical pedagogy and AI and teaching and learning with imagination are all very high up on our themes, but we actually have a specific theme that's called well-being and joy, where you could essentially come in and facilitate a session around that. And we try to get all of the sessions to have a well-being and joy element in all of them if they're content related. So for the facilitators themselves to try and do some of the activities or some reflections and so on that go along with that. But some other sessions that we do under well-being and joy are kind of like meditation and journaling for well-being or journaling for presence. We have specifically also some community guidelines that kind of embody this well-being and this well-being theme, and it's an ethos. It's essentially like it's community guidelines. It's what really guides us all. And some of them are, for example, that everybody's welcome. It's a very, very equity focused space, and everybody is welcome. Some of them are asking specifically people to make space for others and to critique only ideas and not people. And we do some specific things, like we aim to be very accessible and inclusive. So we first of all, we have a quiet room and breakout rooms for people who are not really in that mental or emotional space to engage highly for these interactive sessions, which most are. And they could go to, we invite people to stay off camera or off microphone if they need to, because essentially kindness is all about really opening up the space for you to show up, even if you're not really up for it or up for being on camera or on microphone or on the spotlight, but you really just want to be part of the community. And it really is a space where people feel a very strong sense of belonging.
I myself appreciated that, have appreciated it when I encountered it, first with my fest and then with one other conference where I'm too introverted to want to go into virtual discussion rooms, but I want to hang around and think about it in my quiet space and then come back for the discussion. So having that quiet room as an option for breakout is really an amazing, we don't think of it often, right? Way of being inclusive and kind to those folks who are less extroverted.
Yeah.
But keeping them in the community. I'm going to kick it back to Andy just really briefly, because I know we have a video from Sean and some reflections that we're going to ask folks to engage in before we get to the end of our time together. But Andy, in Writing for Social Change, if you can briefly explain what that is and how you have seen that outcomes from that maybe that are related to compassion and making the world a better place.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, that's a big question, but I think so.
Big question for which we hope a short answer. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, creative writing for social change is it's a 6-week series of workshops. Each workshop is 3 hours, and participants from all around the world, in groups of 6, come together to talk about their lived experiences, particularly on social issues that are important to them. and then we upskill them with creative writing skills so that they can then tell their own lived experience story more effectively, more powerfully. And then I share that on our website and our social media. And that sharing is an important part of the process because it's getting their voice out there, it's letting them be heard. So there's kind of a two-stage process to being heard. The one is what happens within the group, and I would say there is a lot of kindness in those groups because you have people who come from very different backgrounds, very different places, and yet there is an empathy within the room where people are listening to one another, and actually it cuts through all of any political or religious differences. And that to me is really where the magic is. And I would certainly say that is a very strong experience of kindness that I am privileged to kind of experience with every group that I work with. And so that's one way that the kindness has an impact. The other way is giving these voices the wider platform. And so you mentioned Gaza earlier. I've had a number of people, writers from Gaza. It goes from the start of this year. When things were really bad, and actually probably the worst that happened while I've been working with those writers was the August-September re-invasion of Gaza City. And that was very frightening for them. And so I was able to give their voices a platform where they felt abandoned. And actually that I know helped them psychologically. But also I know that from feedback that I had from people who saw those posts, it prompted people to activism, to lobby and do something. Even though it's very hard to know what to do in that situation, people felt motivated because of just the very personal voices that were being heard, that were resonating in a way that was different to journalism or any other kind of storytelling. And then just very quickly as well to say, in a very similar vein to that, I am fortunate to have had a large number of Afghan women participate, both in Afghanistan and outside of Afghanistan. But for those who are in Afghanistan, again, the platform that it gives them, and people in Gaza feel abandoned, but women in Afghanistan feel completely forgotten. And you just don't read about what's going on there in the news anymore. And so for them to have their voices heard within the group and then the wider platform, I know that it really means a lot to them.
Yes, even just the act of listening,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we often wonder, what can I do about this horrible circumstance? But even just that act of listening is so meaningful to the people who that's really the essence of empathy, right? I hear you. You're in a horrible space. That must be so terrible for you. That kind of thing. And of course, if I'm correct about your business model, your participants from these lower income countries don't have to pay to learn how to write and speak their voice. It's subsidized, as it were. But you tell us more.
Yeah. So it's in its simplest terms, people pay an hourly rate to participate in the groups, but that hourly rate is the equivalent of the national minimum wage where they live. So in the UK, it's £12 something, which I don't know, probably about $17, something like that, per hour. If you're in Sri Lanka, it's something like 30 pence or something, but it's basically about $4 or $5. Sorry, no, it's per hour. That's $4 or $5 for the entire course. Sorry. But then there are a few exceptions to that. So Gaza and Afghanistan are two exceptions where nothing needs to be contributed financially to that. And as well as I've had Congolese refugees in Uganda who can't
Wow.
afford the minimum wage
Wow.
even in Uganda. So they participate free of charge and things like that. So it's just to try and make it accessible and kind of try and level the playing field as much as possible.
Andy, it would be kinder to our participants, maybe if you could turn your camera away from the backlight. We're not seeing your face as well as we would love to. There we go. Thank you. Okay, I want to move into our reflection from Sean. Linda, if you can get ready to, or Carolina, get ready to queue up his video. We have 5 reflection questions. We're not going to spend a lot of time with that because we have so many participants who are highlighting ways of building kindness. But we have some reflection questions and a handout. We'll give you the link to the handout after hearing an example. Sean has reflected on kindness and how it shaped his work life. Are we ready for the video? Sean was another
Hello,
of the
everyone, and thank you
participants
for
who was.
joining
Go ahead.
us here today to start off International Education Week. As you have now learned, my name is Sean Wall, and I'm the founder and executive director of World at Hand. While I wish I could be there live to have some great discussion with my peers, I'm happy to still be able to contribute from afar. So thank you, Catherine and AFS, for having me. So let's begin. You've already started to hear what is kindness, and surprisingly, this word can be a bit hard to define at times. So I spent some time making my own mind map. I recommend you do the same at some point, if you haven't already, of what is kindness. So to me, these words come to mind when I think of this: compassion, openness, understanding, empathy, support, help, love, care, and respect. So we have a loose definition, but what does kindness mean to me? I'm sure you've heard the phrases before. Give the same respect to a custodian as you would a CEO, or treat others the way you want to be treated. To me, these phrases build the foundation of kindness. Kindness is about truly caring. It's not talking to somebody and waiting for your turn to speak. It's actually listening, responding, and supporting. It's being present and showing genuine respect and compassion for others, regardless of what they do, who they are, or where they come from. So, how have I used kindness as a disruptive force for change? Through World at Hand. Another phrase that reflects what kindness means to me is pass your blessings. Travel, culture, exposure to the world outside my home community of Denver have been some of the greatest blessings in my life. And I was raised to pass those blessings on. And that's exactly what I do now. 5 years ago, while watching chaos unfold across the globe, but especially back at home, I made a commitment to finally create the study abroad scholarship that I had been dreaming of since 2014. That dream became the foundation for my nonprofit, now known as World at Hand. What began as a community-focused scholarship rooted in kindness and opportunity has evolved into a pathway of programs dubbed the Global Scholars Pathway. Our foundation remains deeply grounded in kindness, in passing opportunities forward and investing in the next generation of leaders. Kindness has been embedded in every area of World at Hand, from holistic program design based on lived experiences, community input, industry best practices. We remove barriers, create access, empower students, and develop leaders every step of the way. This goes all the way from early introduction to post-abroad development. So it's built within our financial structure, where majority of funds go directly towards student support. Most of our operations are still run by volunteers. Administratively, our focus remains on advocating for students, developing key partnerships to expand opportunities, and keeping everything student-centered, grounded in growth, equity, development, and belonging. So, when we talk about kindness in international education, to me the answer is simple: yes. Kindness is international education. So while I could easily take the other side of that argument, my work and my passion within this field, which I believe is yours as well, is rooted in kindness. We live in the most connected era of history. Access to infinite amount of information, yet we remain deeply divided. I believe that global education is the key to solve this. When rooted in kindness, we can bridge those divides and develop leaders that the world so desperately needs. By embedding kindness in our programs, we cultivate students who are locally rooted and globally grown, individuals who understand their communities while seeing the broader world. These students learn to listen across differences, communicate across cultures, and build bridges where others see barriers. That is the kind of leadership and kindness World at Hand strives for. And I believe that's all the time we have for today. So thank you all for having me. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to be in touch, and I look forward to hearing the full discussion. Enjoy!
And I think one more slide so we can put up the reflection questions. Linda or Carolina, if you can put the link to this into the chat so that everyone, thank you for putting the link to Sean. I meant the link to the reflection question sheet for others to use in their workplace. Sean was one of participants along with Sarah and Linda when she could get away from her very busy job with AFS. For a discussion group, we put together informally this summer talking about where did I learn to be kind, what structures are there in my workplace, and also what can I do a little bit differently in my work life to build a structure of kindness. So as you think about these questions, you may want to put answers in the Q&A function. But I also see we have some questions, and I see one that I love here from Eileen Alarcon. I don't know. How does kindness affect learners' motivation and academic performance? I would love to see if one of my panelists has experienced this personally and can answer it. Nadine.
Yeah, so I can speak to this directly, actually. In my experience, you specifically ask about student motivation and academic performance. In my experience, first of all, students get confused, right? This is often they don't know what you mean when you say, you can take another shot at that, or I can give you full feedback on your draft, ungraded, and then you can take the feedback and submit your final. People, first of all, like they get confused, and because I teach adults, they have not gone through that kind of schooling and education. So and they're often also in the mindset of, okay, so the education space is meant to be, policing. They're supposed to, we're supposed to get a good grade for doing it right the first time and so on. So first of all, it's a bit confusing. But then when they figure out that you are, serious about it, and that it's not going to take away at all from the educational process, then they are quite motivated, and they speak very highly of that. I mean, I'll give you a very quick example of what happens with me, just very
Sure, go ahead.
briefly. In my teaching, so I teach at the Professional Educators Diploma at the American University in Cairo, and all my students are either educational leaders, so they're school principals, school managers, and so on, or they are actually teachers in school. So this is the program, this is the context. I give them actually a lot of choice in terms of the assignments that they work on. So I give them a choice of both the topic of their assignment and also the medium. So for example, an assignment where they have to create an infographic, because I teach a lot of educational leadership and educational technology as well. So I give them an assignment, for example, that they have to create an infographic or an animated video. So I just give them the choice. I say, you know what, the amount of work is the same for both. You can choose the topic, you can choose the medium, you can do all of that, and then you can submit a first draft, and then I can give you feedback on that, and then you could take the feedback and adjust it and give it back to me in the final with the feedback incorporated. And I do the same thing also in the final project, where they come in, they present to everybody in the class, and then again, I give the feedback, and I give them a couple of days to adjust based on the feedback, and then they submit the final. They also get feedback
Choice
from
and
everybody in
autonomy
the
are
class.
so important to motivation and learning. If you look into the theory, aren't they, Nadine? They really
Exactly. So universal design for learning is very big on that. It's very strong choice, very strong autonomy. This is, what I focus on so much. Um, and like I said, they first get confused. They're like, "What do you mean?" And then sort of they adjust, and it's actually essentially what Catherine Denial means in her book, right? When she talks about the
It
difference
is
between being
absolutely,
nice
yes.
and being kind. It's not just about being nice. It's really grounding
It's
your
being
teaching practice
kind
in
in the
justice,
sense
right?
of,
And belief and relationality. And so this is really, really
I see
helpful.
Mark
And
has a thought, and
yeah,
I'd
go
love
ahead.
to.
I was just going to add, some of you may know Brene Brown, who is a researcher and writer, and I quote her all the time. Her quote is, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And
Exactly.
so when you think about
Nice.
conversations you're having, whether it's with students or employees, I love this idea of just being as clear as possible rather than being nice, because sometimes nice means beating around the bush and not being direct and clear. And so, to me, that's a really important part and speaks to what Nadine was talking about.
Exactly. No,
Um,
I agree with you, and I love also the work of Brene Brown. Thank you for bringing her up.
Another one of our participants, Goodness Benny, says, how do you avoid people taking advantage of your kindness? Panelists, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I'll go. I would say don't forget the most important thing, being kind to yourself, right? And when we're talking about eliciting, getting motivation from students, and it brought to mind as well, like my advice for teachers as well, because I teach future teachers. And we talk a lot about class management and also the hidden labor of emotional labor, right? Arlie Russell Hochschild, and how that really is one of the biggest. It's part of, it's a big chunk of the work that pedagogy is, managing the classrooms, getting the students' motivation, touching emotions throughout the classroom, being the class conductor in a way, the emotional conductor of what are we supposed to feel, what are we supposed to learn, what are we supposed to be interested in. And in order to already like have a roster of class management techniques in the back of your pocket, but also not forget that the reason why we're doing this is for the, yes, for the students, but it's for yourself to be a good manager, to know like when to say no, when to be clear, when to give grace, and when to say, the deadline is the deadline. So these are all the things I'm thinking about when we're talking about kindness as well, and pedagogy, and educators, having a big heart for educators. And the biggest, I would also add on to that, like where I learned kindness as well is from, um, like in the beginning of my career, I still teach now, but from teachers who really taught me not only to be kind to students, but also kind to myself, right?
Thank you, Sarah. That was inspirational. I know we have more questions in the Q&A, but I want to be kind and mindful to our hosts, AFS, who have a few things to share with us. Linda, how much longer
I
are
think
we
we can
gonna
take a
go?
couple more questions, Catherine. We
Couple more
told
questions.
everybody that we would go until 10:15 Eastern time, New York time. So if you are willing to just take one or two more, and then we'll just go into some ending.
I do want to say that we had fun this summer in our small group discussing this as I won't even quite call it a community of practice. So some of the questions I can't answer, right? We're not the experts. I think these are exactly the questions that we need to be discussing as a profession regularly. I don't know, maybe we need a monthly webinar series that AFS lets us lead or something. But there
We'd be
is,
happy to do
I did, I looked up kindness as a methodology on Google Scholar. There is stuff out there. How do we become kind? How do we teach kindness? So Ricardo, you have a thought, Mark. Go ahead.
Well, I love this question about where we learn kindness. And for me, study abroad was a really important part of how I learned about kindness. I studied in Beijing, 1987, 88. My Chinese skills were not great when I got there. And I still remember today all of the times that people were so kind to me. And, when you study abroad in an unfamiliar place, you are very vulnerable and very reliant
Yeah.
on other people. And to me, that's at the core of so much of what all of us do, right? Is putting people in these sort of difficult, challenging circumstances and helping them learn from the local culture, right? And so for me, those times when I was struggling and lost, and a total stranger would walk up to me and speak beautiful English and say, "Can I help you get to where you're going?" You know, I've held those moments with me throughout my career, and to this day, when I see someone lost on the street here in DC, I often will go right up and say, "Can I help you?" And so I think there is something about learning kindness from these experiences and then paying it forward. That's certainly, I know a lot of study abroad students, when they come home, end up befriending international students, right? Or um, doing things that sort of pay it forward in that way. And it's because of the kindness that they've learned while studying abroad.
Thank you, Mark. I see there's a good question in here. How can kindness be understood as a personal virtue and a professional methodology? Andy, you have really turned kindness into a professional methodology. How did you?
Well, it's interesting actually. I think I find kindness professionally probably easier than in my personal life because when I read the questions before the session about how do we build in kindness into our work practices, I could give several examples like I have already. But then when there was a separate question about how do I practice kindness more regularly, i.e., in my personal life, I actually really struggled to think of any examples, and I don't know kind of what that says about me, but yeah, I think in professional capacity, I find it more straightforward. I mean, I manage one person, and I make sure that whenever I'm giving any feedback to her, that I always remember that I often make mistakes professionally. I get time zones wrong, which is, and I get, I make grammatical mistakes in emails that I write and what have you. And so I just always try and bear that in mind. And I've benefited from that experience as, from my managers when I've worked in various places. I've been fortunate to have very kind managers. And so I try and remember that kindness and pay that forward, as it were. And also, I just think it actually works for me professionally in terms of business, because I think, the better treated your staff are, the more, the better they'll work for you, which, Mark alluded to earlier. And then, into the structures of the business, again, it's been fairly straightforward, with the sliding pay scale, and I believe you should be kind in as an end in itself, but I do think there's also often kind of a payback, that you get. So for me, for example, it's kind of me to level the playing field financially with the fees, but also it's actually quite good for me financially because people in the global north want to join a space where there's people from the global majority and people from Gaza and Afghanistan. So by me being kind and making it accessible for those people actually makes it more lucrative for me, because then I get more people from the global north paying. And so, so I do think kindness should be an end in itself. But I think, the reality is that there's often benefits professionally, financially, socially. Yeah. Nadine.
I see Nadine has her hand up. I'm just going to put in a chat a thing that I have used, a worksheet for pivoting away from unkind behaviors, and they're characterized as white supremacy culture behaviors, but pivoting away from power hoarding, for example, which is an extremely unkind practice that is common to many businesses. Nadine, you had a response, I think, to this question, and then we may have to throw it back to Linda.
Sure. No, it's a very brief thought, because I had the same experience that Andy was just talking about, when you're reflecting about everything and then you're thinking about what you can do on a day-to-day basis or what you do on a regular basis. And I think it's really just anything. Like, I ask myself the question of, what can I do to make this experience a little easier or a little bit more helpful to another human being, right? Um, Anyone that I'm interacting with in that moment, if it's my students or if it's my audience, if I'm facilitating, I just always think, okay, so first of all, in Egypt, English is not is a second language, and it's again only in certain, contexts. So always considering privilege, always considering socioeconomic status, always considering if certain people don't have certain access to, resources or experiences, and always considering the social justice piece, being a little bit more accessible than, people with, disabilities, being a little bit more accessible for them when you're teaching or when you're facilitating, like using the high contrast visuals and high contrast text and alternative text, and not just saying, oh, as you can see in the image in front of you here, but actually explaining and explaining what's on the image, and describing what it is people are meant to be seeing, right? And it goes from just one-on-one conversation all the way to teaching and to speaking to, hundreds of people. And it's always just that question that always makes me or helps me think in that way, to be a little bit kinder and a little bit more helpful. And that would be my thought about this.
So many good questions in the Q&A. Thank you. You're asking the right questions. Clearly, we'll have to do more work together as a profession, which is exactly what I wanted to provoke in bringing these speakers to you. And what I expected from AFS participants. Linda, you always bring such great participants to our conversations.
Well, thank you, Catherine. The feeling is mutual. I think this was a great way for us to kick off International Education Week, with considering how kindness is integral into the international education. And I want to thank you, Catherine, for this idea, for convening this esteemed panel of experts and just very thoughtful and thought-provoking panelists. So thank you to Nadine, Andy, Mark, Sarah, and Sean for all of your reflections and inspiration. We do just have a few housekeeping things. And thank you to all of you, the audience members. I do realize that there still remain a bunch of questions and some interesting ideas in the Q&A. People added both questions and ideas. So please take a minute to look through those questions if you can. But I would like to just go through a few additional items from AFS. So Carolina, if you can go forward, great. So a lot of people were asking in the chat about a digital badge, and yes, we will send you an acknowledgement for your participation today. You will get that within 24 hours, and this recorded resource will be shared back with all of you that did attend and those of you that could not attend, so you can download it and watch at your convenience. Let's go next. We also would encourage you to please fill out a brief survey about this webinar. You can also request additional information once you get into that survey. So we're going to give you the URL in the chat, along with, you can go ahead and scan this QR code if that's easier. This was the first session of a packed week of interesting conversations. So please do take the time to go onto our website and register for the additional sessions that we have this week. In addition to more content and thought-provoking, we also have two sessions on sort of like a virtual booth, and you can register for those sessions or join the link there as well. And here's just an opportunity for you to hear more about AFS and our programmatic offerings. One last announcement. Annually, we host the AFS Youth Assembly. Typically, it's been hosted in New York, but next year in 2026, it will change over to Geneva, Switzerland. We do believe that this is an act of kindness, actually, to encourage more international participation. We do know that sometimes there are barriers for individuals to come to the US, to come to New York, to these kinds of conferences. And so by offering up this session in Switzerland, we believe we'll be able to increase participation and include more people from our global community. So please do check out that website if you are between the ages of 18 and 35. And even if you're over 35, there might be a way for you to participate as well. So please check that out. I think that's everything from us. So I will go ahead and make sure you have links to those URLs in the chat. And I just want to thank everybody again for spending the time with us this morning, this afternoon, this evening. And for those of you that are way late into your evening, we really appreciate you joining us live. Thank you so much, Catherine and panelists, and everybody have a wonderful day.